Hi.
How are you?
Fine, thank you very much.
Good to see you again.
Good to see you. There are many things that we could talk about, but I would very much like if you could bring us back and maybe remember that moment when you realized that you were not going to be president.
It was a total shock to me. So it was, midnight when we saw the results coming out of Wisconsin, Michigan, and Pennsylvania. Did not understand them. They did not really make sense to me. So I was devastated, and I couldn't, I just couldn't come to grips with it. I had to go out and make a speech the next day, which I did. But then I began to really try to make sense of it.
I think a lot of the rest of the world now looks at America, including us in Europe. A lot of people are thinking, what is going on? Mm-hmm. What is happening to America?
We're going through a very difficult period in our history. We've had in the past movements that divided us, including a civil war over slavery, very big turmoil over civil rights and wars, particularly in the last 60 years. But we came through it together. And the ideal of America, a place of promise and hope for people literally from anywhere, was one of our great strengths. To have the diversity, which was our identity, be turned into a danger and a weakness by the Trump campaign was very troubling, and we're still trying to come to grips with it. He has a very hardcore base of support within the Republican Party that shares his views about race and ethnicity and religion, and is looking for scapegoats and is pointing fingers and trying to turn the clock back to a world that no longer exists.
But do you think that Europe and America are just simply moving apart? Because we see life very differently.
Well, Europe, though, still right now has its own identity issues.
Absolutely.
Brexit was the precursor to my election. People were shocked. They didn't expect it to happen. The polls did not predict it. But the disappointment, the anger, the resentment, the anti-immigrant feelings, the sense of distance from the EU, all came together in a vote to pull out of Europe, which is not in England's or Great Britain's or the UK's, however we want to describe it, best interest, but it is it's a venting going on. We've seen the rise of right-wing parties just recently in the German elections. We've also seen the Netherlands and France stand up against right-wing parties. We've seen democracy under internal attack in Poland and Hungary and elsewhere. And we've seen the constant meddling, the interference by the Kremlin in Europe and the United States. So we have some similarities, but I think it's important that we not drift apart. We have to stay committed to the democratic future that we want for our countries and our grandchildren.
Now, some will say that what we are seeing in America and elsewhere, as you described it, is a reaction to a political elite which you have been a part of for many, many years. An elite that didn't really take into consideration that people are worse off today than they were 20 years ago, that the inequality has risen, that the possibility of social mobility has fallen. Do you accept that?
Well, I certainly accept the reality that people feel that way. But I know it's a somewhat losing proposition to argue that the facts don't fully support that. During my husband's 8 years, more people were lifted out of poverty. Incomes rose for everybody. We obtained a balanced budget with a surplus that could have made the investments that we wanted to make in helping lift up more people. That was all done away with under George W. Bush. We were attacked on 9/11, which you remember because we talked after that. I was a senator from New York. Then we cut taxes and waged 2 wars without paying for them and ended up in a terrible economic crisis. Once again, a Democratic president was elected, Barack Obama. We seem to elect Democrats to clean up Republican messes. And Democrats make some tough decisions, as both Bill and Barack did.
Why is it that the population doesn't see that? Because they don't.
Well, partly in our country, I can only speak for the United States, the Republican Party has been waging a cultural war for 60 years. It's been on the basis of race. It's been on religion. It's been on homophobia. It's been on women's issues. And there are no easy answers to the global challenges we face. I happen to think, it won't surprise you, that my husband and Barack Obama were positioning the United States to be more successful, to help lift people up. But they were doing it without the dog whistles and without the kind of appeals to, really fear-mongering that I think are going on now.
But can't you also then realize that there is a responsibility, that the fault for these rises of different thoughts and the situation we are in today are also the fault of your husband and Barack Obama and yourself, because you haven't been able to convince the population where to go?
I think that's a fair criticism. I think it's also, though, been taking place in a media environment that has emphasized divisiveness. I certainly take responsibility for not having been able to convince those 70,000 people who voted the wrong way in the Electoral College to understand that I was laying out an agenda that would have helped them more. But they were looking for some way to vent their feelings. I get that. I mean, that's part of life. That certainly is part of politics. But they're going to be ending up worse off now because they bought into a reality TV campaign that is catering more to the elites, more to the wealthy, giving even more benefits to political forces that are arrayed on the right than ever did before.
But is that because basically in a modern world, democracy doesn't work?
Oh, we can't believe that. I mean, to believe that is to believe that human beings are willing to cede their freedom, to open the door to authoritarianism and predatory behavior.
But isn't that what we're seeing?
Well, but we hope it's going to be temporary. We hope it's not going to last. We hope that starting this year in our elections, we're going to be turning the tide against it. And as you said, we're hoping that Europeans will also stand against this illiberal democratic trend that is being aided and abetted by the Russians and others.
But why did we come to here? What changed?
In our country, we didn't do as good a job as we should have, and this goes back decades, in better equipping people to take and prosper from the jobs of today and tomorrow. I think you've got to do also more to explain that we're not living in a zero-sum America. The fact that other people who've been marginalized and left behind, Black people, Hispanic people, others, are going to be given the chance to move forward doesn't mean that you and your family are going to be marginalized or sidelined. What we've got to do is build more opportunity into the entire system so that everyone will benefit. But in moments of great change and in times where people are frightened about that change, in the wake of a financial crisis that was the result of greed and lack of regulation, people are scared.
But what should be done? Because we see this, like you say, all over. We see populist forces having a much easier time communicating to people about their agenda.
Well, it's a very simple message, isn't it? You know, nothing that's happening to you is your fault. It's the fault of these other people, these immigrants, in our case, these Black people, these Mexican people. Remember, Trump attacked Mexicans in the very beginning of his campaign, his first speech. It's somebody else's fault. So we're going to make America great again, which means that you're going to be back on top without any, you know, without having to share anything with anybody else. I mean, it's a very powerful, simple, wrong message. And I don't think political leaders, but I would also add media leaders, business leaders, academic leaders, none of us have done a good enough job in making the other case that, you know, we're living in complicated times. We've got to rein in power. I mean, I had the most aggressive recommendations for reining in unaccountable corporate power of anybody who's ever run. But, you know, I was trying to explain how we would do it. That was not as effective a message.
But let me just come back to that, because can you understand that a lot of people thought, well, she has those plans now, but where have they been the last 30 years?
Oh, no, that's just wrong. I mean, you know, again, Obama had to save us from financial collapse, but he also was able to get the first national health care system passed. And yes, was it unusual that finally in America we had a national health care system? It was a great accomplishment. But it takes a while to get implemented, and the Republicans and the right wing were talking about what you're going to lose. You're going to lose things because Obama did this health care plan. And, you know, he was defending it, I was defending it, but it wasn't until Trump tried to take it away that people all of a sudden said, oh, I didn't know he was serious. Oh, I didn't understand that. So it's the level of our political discourse. It's the oversimplification of what are complicated issues. It's the steady stream of vitriol and attack that kind of blinds us to the challenges that we have to confront.
Would history have been different had you not been a woman?
I think it very well could have been. I think if you had taken my same positions, my same experience, you know, senator for 8 years, Secretary of State for 4 years, and it was a man saying those things, there's evidence that it might have made a difference. But I'm not ready to accept that, because I want us to keep moving more women into politics, and I want them to get discouraged. I want them to just recognize what they're up against.
You write one place in your book that it's difficult for men to understand the feeling of fear that accompanies many women throughout their lives.
Right.
What do you mean by that?
For most women, walking down a street alone at night heightens your awareness and maybe even your fear. Going to your car in a parking lot after dark, you might pull out your keys, because we were taught as young women that have a key ready in case someone jumps you. You can jab them with the key. Whether that would work or not, who knows? So there's the physical fear. There's also the fear of not being good enough, not being pretty enough, not being thin enough, not being loved enough, that is such a part of sort of the female experience. The messages start early. They come at you, you know, from well-meaning family members who, you know, praise a baby girl for being pretty and praise a baby boy for being active, and it goes on from there. And the media plays a big role in that. So yes, I think that it's physical fear, but it's fear of being not good enough.
But do you see, I mean, some of the things that we're seeing right now with the Me Too campaign,
yes, right,
and all that, will that change things in that area?
I hope so. I hope so. I think what it's doing is sort of ripping the curtain open and giving women the chance to understand they don't have to suffer alone. They don't have to feel, you know, that everything is their fault, that they can find common cause with other women and supportive men in helping to change the culture and thereby helping to change behavior. By making this now a public debate, I think it lifts some of the burden and some of the fear off of individual women.
I think a lot of people after the election felt maybe she should just keep quiet. Maybe she should disappear, because this is a huge sore inside, I mean, a wound inside our body. Why are you here? Why are you defending your issues still? I mean, you are in your prime, but you're not young anymore.
Oh, please. I'm well aware of that. Well, first of all, I care deeply about my country, about democracy, about freedom, and it needs defenders. And I'm going to be an outspoken, vigorous defender on behalf of...
Are you worried?
I'm very worried. I am very worried. I see the retrenchment going on in places in Europe. I see the attack on the press in my own country, the labeling of anything you disagree with as fake news, whether it's factual or not. I see a concerted effort to install alternative facts to replace reality. I see the consolidation of authoritarian power from Russia to Turkey to the Philippines to China. I'm very worried. And I think every person who values their freedom, values the kind of accomplishments of Western democracy should be worried as well. So this is bigger than me. It's bigger than my political career or my loss. But I also have to say, every man who's ever lost was never told to go away in my country. And in fact, they didn't go away. I mean, Al Gore got himself up and going to be the great defender of our planet and our climate. John Kerry went back to the Senate, became a very active Secretary of State. John McCain went back to the Senate. Mitt Romney is now running for the Senate. And so I don't want to say that it's all sexism and misogyny, but I do think there's an element of that. And so that just makes me more determined not to go anywhere and not to be quiet in the face of what I see as real threats to our country and our world's future.
Secretary Clinton, thank you very much for talking to us.
Thank you, Kim. Good to talk to you again.
Good to talk to you. Thank you.